So I looked this morning at your work, the beautiful stained glass pieces that you created. Can you talk a little bit about your process?
The process of doing the stained glass or the process of those particular ones? Because they have their own history, those two.
Let's talk about those two then.
Okay. I'll start by saying I've been doing stained glass for over 25 years, and it's my passion. It's my therapy. In my shop, in my basement, it's my space, and I can just be there and not have to worry about anything. But a year ago, I had an exacerbation with my MS, and I'm in a wheelchair anyways because my legs don't work. But my hands started not working, and which was horrible for me because, well, obviously for anybody, because with your hands you can't do anything, but without my hands I couldn't do my stained glass. And so exacerbations, as I know, because I've had MS for over 35 years, they come and go, and you have to work through them. And so I went to OT, and they were really sad to hear that I couldn't do my stained glass anymore. And so they said, instead of doing a whole piece, do one piece at a time. And it's like, well, that's a good idea. You know, it's, instead of it being overwhelming, I just did one piece at a time. And so I did design the raccoon and the fox. They're bigger pieces, which is obviously easier to handle. And I did them one piece at a time. So each day I just did one piece. And that's how they came to life. So they're my OT creations.
Which is smart.
Which is what?
Well, that was a really smart solution.
It was a smart solution. Sometimes you can get fogged over with the, I can get fogged over with the exacerbation and get frustrated, and for them to just look me in the eye and say, duh, do one piece at a time, it's like, oh, I don't have to finish it all in 1 week. Okay. And so that's what I did. And that's where the raccoon and the fox came from.
It's a wonderful story. And it sounds like it was a bridge towards, you know, where are you at now with the use of your hands?
Right. I was able to do some pretty intricate things after that. I just finished one for a friend of mine, and it's a beach scene, and it's got a flamingo and little flip-flops and a sunrise and palm trees and back to the little pieces and stuff. But back a year ago, I thought, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that again. And I was. So as to the process, what I do is I have a actual stained glass creation software on my computer, and I can take any clip art or any picture and I can trace it and create the stained glass design. And then it also numbers the pieces. It puts color codes on the pieces. You make 2 copies of the pattern. One you put down on the shop table, and the other one you cut apart, and then you just trace each piece onto the correct color glass, cut it out, and it's like a big jigsaw puzzle then. And I use lead and solder to put it together, and then I grout it and shine it up. And the bigger one took me 4 months. The other ones took me 1 day at a time. So that's the process of how I do the stained glass.
And I noticed that on the, I don't know which, I think it may have been the raccoon. It's very, the glass was very directional, like the pieces that you had that you chose to cut out the shapes had a lot of movement in them. Can you talk about that, please?
I'm very particular. The glass that you get, they're large sheets. You can get smaller ones too, but I get the large sheets. And if I find a swirl or in the variegated glass, there's different kinds of glass. First of all, there's plain glass, there's textures glass, there's opaque glass, and then there's the variegated. With the variegated, if I find a piece that I think would like in the fox make the tail and it's in the middle of the glass, I will cut that out.
Mm-hmm.
I don't try to save glass and use just the edges. I use the piece that works best and will look the best with that particular piece of the pattern.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So,
it's
yeah.
really successful the way you've done it, both in the tail and in the, I suppose the front legs. You know,
Right.
there's just a lot of directional. The glass is really directional, and it really serves to sort of support and accentuate the structure of the fox.
Of the fox, right? And I think it's that way too in the raccoon, but I think the glass for the fox with the tail, it just really worked.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, but I do try to do that. I think for me, once I figured out I knew how to do stained glass windows, then I started working with more specifically with the glass and how the glass can make the window look even better.
Mm-hmm.
And that was nice that you actually picked that out.
Well, too, I think it's, you know, I think it's also quite a lot lighter. You know, the fox is in general quite a lot lighter. So I actually think it is also directional on the raccoon. It's just maybe a little harder to see in a photograph. I'm sure that when you're in person, because on the tail of the raccoon, it looks like you've got you know, you've got a lot of different pieces that sort of articulate the tail. Is that right?
I do. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And when you have the pattern, before you cut it out, you have to actually put like slash marks on which way you want the glass to go. Because once you cut the pieces out, you have no idea.
Uh-huh.
And so you need to plan that out before you cut the pattern apart. And then when you place those pieces on the glass, you know which way you want the variegation of the glass to aim.
Mm-hmm.
And it's nothing is by accident that shows up. And if it doesn't look good, it's like, oh boy, I tried. But most things it's purposely created that way.
Mm-hmm. And I'm excited to hear about your work today. You have two beautiful pieces in the show that are lino cuts. Can you tell me about those?
Well, they're reduction relief lino cuts, which means the process is using one block for many different colors.
Mm-hmm.
The first color you put down, you ink it, and you carve out whatever you want to be, for instance, say white, and then you carve that out, and then you ink it and print a number of pieces of paper. Usually I try and do a run of 20. And then once I've got that first color on, then I proceed to for the next color, which means carving out some of the first color, and so on and so forth, until finally, at the end of 8 or 9 different colors, there's not much left to the block. Picasso called it suicide relief printing. So the 2 pieces, one of them is based on a pair of these wonderful old maple trees in front of my house. And I did a whole series of these that were one for each season: fall, winter, spring, summer. And it just fascinates me the way that the trees are so huge and beautiful at different times of the season, and how much, I mean, I look at trees and I see not only the form, but I see the negative shapes and the colors and spaces and how they relate to each other. So I did one for each season. The other one was based on a photograph I took outside my front door of a street light affecting the corner. There's a little roundabout in the middle of the corner, and you couldn't see the street light through the photograph, but its effect on the snow and the trees, and it was sort of snowing at the same time. It was just sort of this magical moment, and I had to do that. I had to take that into consideration and create this piece. So those are the 2 pieces I have in the show.
So the one that, I mean, what really strikes me about the one you were just describing with the street light, I mean, it's just this beautiful sort of tone on tone of this kind of milky blue, and that's feeling, really ambient feeling that you get there. Can you talk about the palette?
Yeah, I mean, I started out with basically looking at the photograph, and the palette was pretty much like a pale gray, and then a little darker gray, and then some blues and some blacks, and I wanted to use a process where I was able to roll the block with 2 different inks at the same time to kind of give a little bit of a fading from a lighter to a darker. And then after that, I added more color and more different carvings to that same block. So yeah, the color, that whole palette evokes a sort of mysterious sense of I don't know what it's very serene. It's compelling to me to look at it as well as to work on the piece. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Well, it's just, yeah, I mean, it's really successful. The composition is really strong. And the one with the 2 trees, so is that your house then, in between the 2 trees?
It is. I was a friend of mine who is an artist, but she also does reproductions of art. She's got a great shop, and she put together a show asking for the title of the show was "What's Underneath," and for me, looking at that imagery in the fall with this great palette of yellows and golds and things like that, with the orange door that we have in our house, that fit the title of What's Underneath. It was basically the door underneath. So I continue to take that image from basically the same spot across the street and work it that way. There's less delineation of like shadow and depth and things like that. It's more of a 2-dimensional piece, but I just love the shapes and the colors and how the contrast between the trees and the limbs and things like that. At first, when I first started to do this, I thought, okay, it's going to work out well with all these yellow leaves and golden and orange leaves, because there won't be that many branches to work about. And as I progressed towards winter, I realized, wow, there's a lot of branches I have to put in there. And it sort of evolved into this piece that, it was less about trying to capture it exactly how it was, but more of like an impression of what it was. And it's certainly not impressionism, but I didn't spend a lot of time recreating every single little twig in the tree, but the whole process was a lot of fun.
So is that the white then of the paper, or is that white additive?
It's the paper, the white of the paper.
So I think that's really interesting I'm also a printmaker, so I understand your process, but I think it's a really interesting process for people to understand that, like, you got to actually think in advance to continue to allow nothing to be printed over that white space. And I'm also wondering about, well, maybe you could talk a little bit about the process. And I'm also curious about seasons. And I just wonder how, if you feel like, the weather or the seasons really impacts your work.
For this series, it certainly did, and also for the piece on the corner, the winter light. But the things that impact me more are looking at shapes and forms. Ever since I was a kid, I spent a bit of time in hospital, and with nothing to do but look at the walls and look at the ceilings and look out the window, and I started to look at all of the forms and the shapes and the triangulations and squares. And every time I look out the window, I'm trying to move my head so that I can see a perfect square in how the window is and all of that. So I think that informs my work a little more than particular seasons. I guess that's pretty much how it works for me anyway.
That's interesting that, so you're really talking about your way of looking, and you said something in your artist statement about looking versus seeing. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, when I was in art school, I had this great drawing teacher, Don Bunsey, and he gave me the inspiration to actually look at something. When a child is given a assignment to draw the cat. Well, they start drawing the cat, but they're not really looking at the cat. They're drawing the cat as they think the cat is and how they see it in their minds. So seeing versus looking. When you look at something, you're looking at all of the shapes and the forms and how the lines are and the shadows and coloration, and trying to grab that as the inspiration for the piece. And instead of sitting down and oh, there's a hand, I'm just going to draw this hand like it's you put like those kids drawings of turkeys at Thanksgiving, draw the hand, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's kind of the difference between the two.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit more about sort of how that eventuated for you, sort of what it maybe felt like when you were in the hospital, and how your visual vocabulary, visual ability of seeing was developed at that time and through now?
It did, yeah. It was a long process, I guess. It's a very subtle one that I wasn't really aware of until I started really seriously, becoming an artist, going to art school. But I always had having a disability it gives me the opportunity to try and figure out how to do something that other people can do easily. So I figure out how to do things in a different way, but I accomplish pretty much the same thing. For instance, riding a bike. It was never easy riding a bike until I figured out, oh, okay, I'll do it this way. And then it became easy. It wasn't a matter of mechanics or of the bicycle or anything. It was just a matter of how I perceived being able to get up on that bike and ride. So I've always sort of, it's that sort of, I don't know, it's that artistic sensibility that comes up when you're looking at something and you're seeing something that nobody else is seeing. I like to approach things from a perspective that's oddly different from most other people, the general public, I guess. It's like seeing something that somebody else and trying to explain it to somebody and they have no clue what I'm talking about. For instance, I was asked one time, well, how do you know this stuff? How do you know which way the screw is supposed to turn when you're turning it? I was like, well, I try to explain it and they don't get it. I'm not that quite simple, but I look at things. I mean, that old cliche of looking at things outside the box, and I guess I've always been kind of outside the box.